Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening. My name is Phil Enquist. Thank you for joining me. I want to talk a little bit about rewilding and the importance of rewilding as we are witnessing a rapidly urbanizing planet. And I'm going to do that through a series of watercolors from notebooks that I kept during the pandemic year. These watercolors that I will walk you through are all of one woodland, one red oak savanna remnant, one fragmented piece of what used to be a vast woodland through the state of Illinois. And this experience demonstrated to me the power, the importance of nature, and how we must give nature a voice as we urbanize our world. These paintings from the plant world are very different for me than my usual work. I'm an urban planner and an architect, and for the last 30 years, I've worked mostly with government agencies, planning bureaus, governments around the world, helping them anticipate and accommodate rapid urbanization. Many cities in China, the United States, Saudi Arabia, Middle East, South America. We know we are on an urbanizing planet, right? And we're growing from 7 to 8 to 9 to 10 billion people. By the middle of the 21st century, we're also going to see advancing from 50% urban to 75% urban, 75% of all people living in cities. So we are in an urbanizing world. Yet, and this is a big yet, we don't seem to place value on nature. Why is that? We don't place value on ecology or ecological systems. We fragment our woodlands. We fragment our prairies, our grasslands, our sedges, our wetlands. We pipe, we culvert, we fill, we raise, we adjust as if nature's value to us is zero. And Illinois provided me, the state that I live in, provided me through this pandemic year, a lab, a perfect lab to study this phenomenon of rewilding and getting back to some sense of an ancient landscape. And this place is called Crow Island Woods, and it's less than 20 acres in size. It is the head of a pin when we talk about the earth. So I'm going to walk through this with you, and I'll start with this map. This map shows what's called the Prairie Peninsula, which moves north-south through the heartland of the United States, and there's a branch off to the east, and that green dot is right where Crow Island Woods is, and it's right where these woodlands meet Lake Michigan, one of the Great Lakes. And this rich, incredible prairie landscape is what gave the state of Illinois its identity and its name. But in the last 200 years, from 1820 to today, we have lost 99.9% of that grassland. So between 2009 and 2014 in the United States, 175,000 acres of urban tree cover was lost annually. Every year in the United States, we lost almost 200,000 acres of tree cover. And to make that little statistic even worse, impervious surfaces, paving, asphalt and concrete paving or buildings in cities increased by almost the same amount. So we took away urban tree cover and we added impervious surface. If we look globally, and most of you people listening to this probably know this better than I do, that worldwide we've lost 19 million acres of forest every year. So this little 20 acres is nothing. However, to me, in this year of moving much more slowly, it meant everything. And I painted in very informal ways while I was walking or sitting for a minute. And it began in March, and March in Illinois is still winter. So March 14th, March 15th, I'm walking these woods, and the only thing you really notice were the tree trunks of these red oaks, black oaks, bur oaks, quite substantial trees, some of them 60 to 80 feet tall. And the way they would frame the sky or frame a winter setting sun was just remarkable. The texture of the trunks layered on top of each other was rich and interesting. And even the bark itself on these old trees was very nice. But at the same time, I didn't know what I was really looking at. I was just simply walking in the time of the pandemic, like so many people were. And I was reading a number of books, one of them by John Riley, The Once and Future Great Lakes Country. And he has a quote where he says, "Out beyond our imposed dominion of roads, cities, and fields, there still beats the true heart of the land." And I felt that when I walked through these woods. I felt a connection, the beat of the land, the beat of that heart, the pulse of the planet somehow comes through in the native landscape. And towards the end of March, a remarkable thing happened, that on this brown, dead forest floor that was just waking up from the winter, this one plant appeared, a crocus. I don't even think it's a native plant. But overnight, this little plant, maybe an inch and a half high, shot up in school bus yellow. And it was like listening to the violinist tuning an orchestra before the symphony began. It was like, get ready. The house lights are dimming and the symphony is about to begin. And I went home and I painted a very different painting than tree trunks. I painted this crocus in a way that to me was like energy emerging from the land, the pulse of the planet. There still beats the true heart of the land. And through April and early May, I watched green start to show up in this woodland. I saw the forest floor start to rise up out of the brown remnants of winter, and I saw leaves unfurling. And then as spring progressed, the ground plane became incredibly rich with sedges, with tall grasses, with ferns. Hundreds of different species of plants started to emerge from the ground. And at the same time, all of the trees started to develop their leaf canopies. And you could literally see from day to day the increase in height of the prairie grasses and the branches starting to bend under the weight of the leaves. At the same time, there's a small portion in the woods that's a wetlands. And the wetlands started to emerge in just incredible ways, from a complete pond of water to suddenly plants emerging out of this in rich textures and unbelievable colors as spring evolved. So complicated, I would sit there wondering, how do you paint something like this? How do you paint the complexities, the richness of colors? And for me, this was just simply note-taking. This isn't meant to be serious art. It's just really taking notes. I also started reading a number of articles, and this one by Andrew Hipp, who's a senior scientist at Morton Arboretum. He said each individual plant or square foot of land in this forest is a point of entry into paths braided through the Anthropocene. And to me, that was also very powerful, that not only were you hearing the pulse of the planet or the beat of the heart you were also being connected back to that 10,000-year-old landscape that we have lost in just the last 200 years. And as summer progressed, it was just incredible what was happening. I was no longer painting tree trunks. I couldn't even see the tree trunks. There was a full immersion occurring. When you walked through this woods, the leaf canopy hung low and the prairie grasses were far over my head, and they were all braiding together, the leaves and the grasses, in this remarkable full immersion of green, backlit by the sun. And you can just see, or I can see in this watercolor sketch, the sun hitting these leaves, the heat of that summer morning in the Midwest. And the patterns and the colors that were evolving between the grasslands and the leaf canopy. And the ferns that were growing out in underneath the oaks were giving me new patterns, new colors, new complexities. I had no idea how to paint. I just felt like I would try to paint and to think about it later. Let's get this collection of images in my notebooks and then we'll think about it later. And what I found is I was painting very differently by the summer. I was painting the full immersion. I was painting the full system of ground plane, of prairie grasses, of woodlands, of tree canopies, everything together. And this was a point of entry into paths braided through the Anthropocene. I could stand and look at this landscape and be connected back to that landscape. And my paintings did start to evolve, and I wasn't painting objects anymore. I felt I was painting the full scene, from the grasslands to the tree canopy. And whether it was an early morning or later in the day, the complexity of the trunk bark, the complexity of the grasslands, the complexity of the branch structure all came together. And I tried to paint in ways that celebrated this complexity, maybe not literal translations, but more abstracted, simplified note-taking of the complexity of a native red oak savanna in Illinois. And even as the sun would set and I would still be in that forest, suddenly everything became blue or black. And the forest floor and the tree canopy merging together in just incredibly beautiful and abstract ways. Many days I walked without paints. I walked with just a pencil and a notepad. And I took notes again of complexity of plant form without worrying about what color everything was. And these became these sort of abstract compositions given to me by this wonderful native landscape. The third quote I wanted to add into this presentation today for you is by Julian Hoffman, who wrote a book called Irreplaceable, The Fight to Save Our Wild Places. And he said that place can be powerfully transformative. It helps shape who we are, impressing itself upon us with all the force of a sea storm, as a Turner painting would do, or as subtly as the unfurling of oak leaves by luminous degrees in spring, recalibrating our lives. And that was my feeling. My life had been recalibrated by the pandemic. I was moving much more slowly, observing much more, walking more close to home, and maybe listening better. And I felt for the first time, maybe in a very long time, nature had a voice and I was listening. And then again, like that crocus in spring, one day in late August, literally overnight, the Virginia creepers and the other vines on these trunks of these red oak trees turned red. And it was again like, okay, we're entering a new movement in this symphony. We're entering the conclusion. We are entering maybe the sort of great culmination of 4 or 5 months of tremendous growth. And suddenly the leaves started shifting from green to yellow, to orange, to red. And the forest was completely transforming itself. And there was also a quietness and evenness, something that was different than in the spring, less energetic, more subtle. And I started painting again differently. And it was, in many ways, recalibrating our lives as the forest went into a kind of fall decline. The last piece of this lecture is really about how we fragment our natural systems. Everywhere we go, everywhere we look, we see how we have fragmented our ecological systems. So how do we move forward? How do we accommodate 10 billion people on this planet? And how do we adjust to climate change? And how do we integrate all of these great new technologies and at the same time listen to nature? It's maybe the simplest thing. It's certainly one of the least expensive things. But yet we parcel land into acres and half acres and quarter acres, and we sell and develop and we chop up this larger flowing landscape. We chop up our forests, we chop up our grasslands. How do we stitch these panels back together? How do we bring these back together into a healthy ecosystem for all life, for human and for the wild? How do we put these cards back together so we don't have chopped up woods, but we have a living, breathing, healthy forest system? And when we look at our cities, and these were done while I was in Chicago, my city, and you look out at your windows and you see we have fragmented everything. And we've left little pockets, little squares for trees, but it's not really a natural system. We put our water in pipes. We don't let our stormwater get back to the aquifer. We don't even let, in Chicago, our rainwater get back to Lake Michigan. We put it in a reverse flowing river and send it along with our waste to the Mississippi River and the Gulf of Mexico and a dead zone. How healthy is that? So as we urbanize our world, we continue to fragment, we continue to chop into smaller and smaller pieces. And I think we have to invent, in this century, we have to invent a new way of thinking about land use, thinking about urban structures, thinking about planning in a way that's more fluid, more connected, and allows nature to exist in healthy ways. We have to stop fragmenting systems, stop cutting our rivers off, stop barricading, damming, cementing the edges or steel lining the edges of our river systems, and leave far more room than small little squares for nature to exist. So I just want to conclude with these thoughts that we can come up with something different. We don't have to cut and segment and fragment as if nature has no voice or nature's value is zero. We can rewild our planet, and we can develop a rewilding vision. And this vision develops a far-reaching landscape network braided with our cities, braided in with our cities and giving nature a voice. It would include lands, plants, and water systems. We would think in terms of systems. It would include parks and preserves big enough to provide natural habitat. This landscape would also cool our cities, and filter our waters and return that water to the aquifer. It would provide us, humans, with a connection to our ancient landscapes. It would shift our aesthetics from the mowed lawn and the artificial and exotic landscapes to native landscapes. It would give nature equal footing with city building. I think a very important point. And it would create healthy places for human and the wild. So these watercolors also were part of this notebook. And I really, to be honest with you, don't know what they are, except that if this was a land use strategy, or this was a city and nature planning strategy, it shows a fluidity, a lack of boundaries, a mix of maybe urban and wild, a mix of developed and not developed, a mix of native forest and grassland and city. Maybe, I'm not really sure. But it's a mix and it's boundaryless. It's not confined. And there's an energy in these paintings that I love, that each one of these dots has dots within. Each one of these dots could represent a forest system or an urban district or agriculture that is contributing to the natural systems that we have, not opposing it. How we grow our food, how we build our cities, how we move our people have to be thought of in terms of how we support natural systems. So my last sketch, I think, was another sketch in this woodland. And I just wanted to say to all of you that we are all in this together. As you know, the human and the wild, all of us are in this together. And collectively, we can define a future where nature has a voice in how we shape our cities. So just for your records, I wanted to document what I was quoting earlier. The article by Andrew Hipp, Taking the Measure of a Forest, you can find it here. Irreplaceable, The Fight to Save Our Wild Places by Julian Hoffman, you can find here. The Once and Future Great Lakes Country, An Ecological History by John Riley, you can find here, which I thought would be helpful for all of you. So thank you so much for spending a few minutes with me to look at a mere 20-acre red oak savanna remnant that I should also say the local park district of the village that this remnant is in have been working for the last 5 or 6 years in weeding out invasive species, in reintroducing native species, strengthening the health of the ground plane as well as the tree cover. They are doing it at the scale of 20 acres. We can do it at the scale of the planet. Thank you so much.